Hello friends, welcome back to my channel and welcome to a new video. If you guys are new here, my name is Rachelle. I'm so glad you guys are joining us today. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys the best books I read in 2024. It is so crazy to me that 2024 has come to an end. This year literally flew by so fast and I cannot believe that 2025 is going to be here in a few days. Looking back at all the books I read this year, I'm actually really happy with how my reading journey went in 2024. My reading goal this year was 40 books. And so far I've read 47, so I definitely passed my reading goal, which is amazing. I might be able to finish a couple more books by the end of 2024, so I'm just gonna make a guess and say that by the end of 2024 I would have read 48 or 49 books. I also had very few DNFs this year, which I'm also really happy about. So yeah, it was definitely a really good reading year for me. But of course, for this video, out of the 47 books I've read so far, I'm gonna be sharing with you my top reads and my favorite books I've read so far in 2024. Some of these books I honestly cannot believe I read this year because it literally feels like I read these books ages ago, when in reality I only read these books in the first few months of 2024. Yeah, so I was actually a little bit surprised when I was creating this list for this video. Anyway, let's just jump right into this video. These books I would be listing today are in no particular order. I definitely could not rank these books. I would just get so indecisive on which one is better. So yeah, these are not in any particular order. These are just all my favorites. The first two books I have here are part of a series, and these books are The Ballad of Never After and A Curse for True Love. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, and this is the third. This series is a trilogy, and this is a YA fantasy. I can't really tell you what these two books are about without giving you any spoilers, so I thought instead I will tell you guys what the first book is about. In this book, we have Evangeline, and she is believed in true love and happily ever afters until she learns that the love of her life will marry someone else. And so she becomes desperate to stop the wedding, which leads her to striking a deal with the Prince of Hearts, and in exchange for his help, he asks for 3 kisses to be given at the time and place of his choosing. But after Evangeline's first kiss, she learns that bargaining with an immortal fate is far more dangerous than she ever expected. This book was a good read, but it was probably my least favorite out of the entire trilogy, only because this book just felt like the beginning of something bigger. In the second and third book, the characters were more developed, the stakes were higher, and the adventures were more exciting. These two books, and I would actually say the entire series, were such quick and easy reads. They were definitely page turners, and I found myself so invested in the story that I didn't want to put it down. Once I finished one of these books, I would have to immediately pick up the next book. That's how addicting the story was. I found myself really desperate for answers when reading these books. I also really liked the fairy tale feel of these books. It just made the story and the world just feel more magical, and I also really love Stephanie Garber's writing. It was just so gripping, and honestly, Stephanie Garber is one of my favorite authors. I'm pretty sure I own all of her books already, but if she were to write anything new, I would 100% buy it. That is how much I like her writing. Then we have A Little Life. This is a literary fiction novel about 4 college classmates, and they are broke and adrift as they move to New York in search of fame and fortune. While their relationships are influenced by addiction, success, and pride deepens over the years, these men are still held together by their devotion to Jude, a man scarred by unspeakable childhood trauma. I'm gonna be so upfront and say this right now that this book is not for everyone. This story is literally heartbreak after heartbreak after heartbreak. There are so few happy moments in this book. The majority of this book is definitely a sad read, so I would definitely look up the trigger warnings to help you decide whether or not you want to read this book. Based on the content, this book was definitely a very difficult read, and I wouldn't really say I enjoyed it. I did end up giving this book 5 stars, not because I enjoyed it, but because it was such a gripping story. In all 800 pages of this book, I never found myself bored. The story had my attention right from the first page. This book actually took me a really long time to get through. Yes, it's a thick book, but the main reason why it took me so long to read was because it was just so dense, there was a lot of detail, and it was just a lot to process. This is definitely a book that you will have to mentally prepare yourself to read. Next, we have House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This is the third book in the Crescent City series, and it picks off right where we left off in the second book. I just loved absolutely everything about this book. I was instantly hooked right from the first page, and the story had my attention all the way through to the end. I actually read the first and second book in this series like last year, so it's actually been a bit of time in between reading the second book and this book, but I will say once I picked this book up, I was hit with such a nice feeling because I love being thrown back in into this world and just reading about all the characters that I love so much. In this book, it was also really nice how Sarah J. Maas switched POVs pretty often. There are a lot of characters in this story, and each character is on a different journey. So by constantly switching POVs, it kind of felt like we were getting immediate updates of where each character was at. Usually in fantasies with a lot of characters, I would sometimes forget about a character if they haven't been mentioned in a while. But with this book, I didn't have that issue at all. So I definitely think SJM did a really good job at formatting this book. The story also had a really good wrap up. I don't think it's the final book in the series, but it was a good closing to some of the issues we were having earlier on in the series. For example, in the first book, we had this problem, and that problem spiraled into something bigger. And in the second book, we were trying to solve this problem, but it failed. So in this third book, we had a second attempt to solve this issue, and it finally happened by the end of the book, so the story just felt so complete, and I absolutely love that feeling. Like the other books in her series, Sarah J. Maas puts a lot of detail into her writing. It's almost to the point where she's info dumping, and I'm not usually a fan of this because it stretches out the story and it makes it longer than it needs to be, and it eventually becomes a slower read for me as well. I am someone who needs momentum in a story to keep me focused on what I'm reading, so I find that when there's info dumping, it loses that momentum, and that's when I get lost in the story. This actually happened to me when I was reading the second book in the series and a little bit in the first, so I was honestly expecting a little bit of that in this book as well, but I did not feel that way at all when I was reading this book, which is actually surprising to me. I definitely feel like it took reading the first and second book for me to fully fall in love with the world, the characters, and just the story itself, and that's why when I was reading this book, the info dumping didn't affect me in the same way that it usually does. The next book is Real by Kennedy Ryan. This is a dual POV romance about Neva and Cannon. Neva is an understudy on Broadway and her name isn't known yet, but then she gets a chance at stardom because Cannon, who is a Hollywood film director, sits in on one of her Broadway performances and decides to cast her as his lead in his newest biopic film. This story felt so realistic because it's filled with so many real life issues, such as love, work, family, health, and being a person of color. I loved our two main characters. They are such likable people, and when I'm reading each of their POVs, their voices are so captivating. I love how strong and kind Neva is. It's just so inspiring to read about characters who don't let the film industry tear them apart and make them so incredibly jaded, because let's face it, you might think working in the film and entertainment industry is glamorous as an outsider, but let me tell you from experience, because I do work in this industry as well, it's not glamorous at all, and in fact I think it's the exact opposite. Also, Cannon is just such a good man as well. There are so many times where I found myself falling for him too. He definitely became another one of my book boyfriends. Neva and Cannon's love story just had me from the beginning. I honestly did not expect myself to like this book as much as I did. Next, we have Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood, and our main characters are Elsie and Jack. Elsie lives a double life. By day, she's a professor at a few different institutions, and by the other day she has a side hustle offering herself as a fake girlfriend, tapping into her people-pleasing skills to mold herself into the best fake girlfriend for her clients. It's a pretty sweet gig until she finds out that hers and Jack's life intersect in more ways than one, because not only is Jack the older brother of her favorite client, but he's also the cold-hearted physicist that ruined her mentor's career, and he also happens to rule over the physics department at MIT, standing right in between Elsie and her dream job. This book got me out of a reading slump. That's how good this book was. It was just such a cute and wholesome romance. It had me swooning and giggling out loud. Jack and Elsie were both such likable characters. I actually found myself really caring for both of them. I also can't get over how Elsie needed Jack to become the best version of herself. That is what real love looks like, in my opinion. It was also such a pleasure to read about an educated woman, and I love how Ali Hazelwood gives a voice to the woman in STEM. Next, we have Throne of the Fallen. This is a romantasy, and our main characters are Camila and Envy. Envy isn't a saint, and he's been waiting a really long time to participate in this game. So when he receives a note that the game will finally begin, he will do everything in his power to win. Camila, on the other hand, made a desperate mistake, and now Lord Vexley is blackmailing her because of it. So to avoid Vexley and the scandal that eventually will happen, Camila is forced to enter a devil's bargain with Envy envy. I actually found the concept of this book so interesting. This book takes place in the Regency era. I would think along the lines of Bridgerton. Basically, this book is Bridgerton and a fantasy mixed together. Also, this book is based off of the 7 deadly sins. So this first book is of course about envy, and I'm pretty sure each book in the rest of the series will feature a different sin. And through this book, we actually learn that all the sins are actually brothers. These are the 2 reasons why I think this book is so unique and special, because I've never read anything like it before. I was instantly hooked right when I picked up this book. I also love the enemies to lovers tension between Camila and Envy. It's always nice to see how hostility slowly transforms into passion, and how these characters want to hate each other, but eventually they can't because of course their feelings take over. I honestly couldn't get enough of the chemistry between these 2. I finished the book and it actually left me wanting more. This book is definitely for you if you love reading about demons, the fae, vampires, high stakes, and of course fantasy smut. Next we have A Touch of Darkness. This is a romance retelling of Persephone and Hades. Persephone is the goddess of spring, but only in title because ever since she was a little girl, flowers would shrivel at her touch. After moving to New Athens, she hoped to have a life disguised as immortal, and so she attends university for journalism, but one night she goes out with her friend Lexa to this nightclub that's actually owned by Hades, who's the god of dead, and while at this nightclub she ends up playing a round of poker with this mysterious man, and she finds out later that that man happens to be Hades. They finish their poker game and she loses, so she finds herself in a contract with Hades, and of course the terms are impossible. This book falls into the forbidden love trope, and I actually enjoyed this book more than I thought I would. It was actually kind of insta-lovey, and usually I don't like those types of books, but for some reason it didn't really bother me that much when I was reading this book. And I think that's because from the beginning it was so clear that Persephone and Hades were meant to be together. Their personalities definitely complement each other, and they both challenge each other so much. They are just such a good couple. Next we have Keeping 13, and this is the second book in the Boys of Toman series. There are currently 5 books out right now. The first book is Binding 13, then we have Keeping 13, and these 2 books are about Johnny and Shannon's love story. The rest of the books in the series feature a different couple. I am actually surprised at how much I like this book and the fact that it made it into my top books of 2024, because when I was reading this book it just felt like a Wattpad read, and I don't usually like these types of stories because I feel like the stories are just so stretched out and it really doesn't need to be that long. You could honestly tell the same story in less words. But I think what made me really like this book was because of Johnny and Shannon. They are actually so perfect together. Johnny is this rugby player and he's got everything. He's got money, talent, and he's also really smart, and he can also probably have any girl he's ever wanted. He's honestly that jock that girls throw themselves at, but he honestly is not your typical jock. He just has a heart of gold and he's just such a good person. Meanwhile, Shannon has an abusive past and she's shy and she's timid. She's literally the exact opposite of Johnny, but for some reason Johnny can't seem to stay away from her and he feels the need to protect her. Their connection is just so cute. This couple has my entire heart. For them, I would literally do anything, and that includes ignoring my usual red flags in books. Next, we have Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I read this book in the beginning of 2024 and it literally feels like a lifetime ago. But anyway, this book is a literary fiction novel and Sam and Sadie are our main characters. They are childhood friends, and before even graduating, these two have created their first blockbuster video game together. Not even 25 years old, Sam and Sadie are successful, rich, and brilliant game creators. But of course, these qualities won't protect them from their own creative ambitions or the betrayal of their hearts. I remember being really nervous to start this book because I knew it was about gaming and I'm not a gamer, so I thought I would have a difficult time understanding this book. But let me make this clear. You do not need to be a gamer to understand this story. When the story mentions anything about gaming, it is explained so well. But this book was about so much more than video games because this book is also about friendship and what it can be like working with friends professionally and how personal lives can bleed into those partnerships. This story captured so much of the human experience and it felt so incredibly real and raw. And I loved it. It was just such a captivating read. I will say that this book started off as a slower read for me. I wasn't bored or anything. It definitely had my attention, but the writing was a lot to take in, and I don't know if that makes make sense, it wasn't a book that I could just fly through. And also Gabrielle used some really weird wording, and I would sometimes have to look up these words in a dictionary. But once I got used to her writing style, this book definitely felt like an easier read. And then it became more addictive to the point where I just wanted to keep reading. I also really liked how Gabrielle used video games as a medium to tell the human experience. It was definitely very creative and it was executed well. This is definitely a book that you need a lot of patience to read, but in my opinion, it is so worth it. Then we have The Only One Left by Riley Sager. This is a mystery thriller, and in the year of 1929, the Hope family murders shocked the Maine coast. Most people assume that 17-year-old Lenora Hope murdered her mom, dad, and sister, but the police were never able to prove it, other than her denial after the killings. She never spoke publicly about that night ever since. She has also never stepped outside of Hope's End, which is a cliffside mansion where the murders happened. It's now 1983, and home health aide Kit has been assigned to care for Lenora, who's now in her 70s. Confined to a wheelchair and rendered mute, one night Lenora types out an offer for Kit. She tells her that she will tell her everything. And as Kit helps Lenora write out the events of that night, it becomes clear that there is more to the story than what people know. One of the things I really liked about this book was how I was never able to predict the ending. There were so many moments that completely shocked me, and a lot of the twists just kept on twisting. The story was also really complex and well thought out. Also, almost every chapter ended off with a jaw-dropping revelation that just made me want to keep reading for more answers. This book was a page turner for me, and what helped me get through this book so fast was the fact that it had short chapters. I personally think it's important for any mystery thriller to have short chapters because it just keeps you on edge and it just keeps you on your toes. The last book I have for you guys in this video is Magnolia Park's Into the Dark. This is the third and last book in the Magnolia and BJ POV storyline, and let me tell you, this book did not disappoint. This book and the entire series is actually so addicting because it's like a British version of Gossip Girl. There's so much drama and some of it can be seen as silly, but yet I will still continue reading it and I will eat it up. There's just something about Jessa's writing in this series that makes it so hard to put down. In this book, I really did appreciate how Jessa addressed themes of love, joy, grief, the growth, and also the pain. It all just felt so raw and real. You just feel all the feels when you're reading this book. And this book in particular does read a little bit different than the first and second book and Magnolia and BJ's POV, but it reads different in a good way. The way Jessa wrote this book, it was just so beautiful. This being the last book in Magnolia and BJ's story, it's sad, but this book was also a good wrap up to their love story. It just tied all the loose ends together. I absolutely loved it. If there's one series I wish I could read again for the first time, it would be this one. Alright friends, that is all I have for you in this video. Those are my top reads of 2024. If you ask me, I would highly recommend you to read these books because these are some of my favorites. So if you haven't read any of these books yet, I hope you will add these to your TBR. But if you have read these books already and you want to share with me your thoughts, please let me know what you think of them in the comments down below. I would love to hear your opinions. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I will see you guys in my next one. Bye!
Pull the key out the ignition. Run your mouth but I never listen. You hold me back, will never last. Keep talking all your shit. Wondering how all this started. You left me broken hearted. You flip my words, yeah, this love hurts. Keep talking all your shit.